There is a tent on a slope. February, northern Urals. The wind has been moving across this ridge since long before any of us were born, and it will move across it long after we forget why we came here. Inside the tent, 9 sleeping rolls, boots stacked, a diary on a folded coat. The lamp is out. Outside, the temperature has dropped to roughly 25 below. And at some point in the next few hours, every person inside that tent will choose to step out into the dark. We do not know why. They were 9, students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, in a Soviet Union still rebuilding from the war. Their leader was Igor Datlov, 23, an experienced cross-country skier. The expedition was rated Category 3, the highest difficulty their sport recognized at the time. Their goal was Otorten, a peak in the northern Ural range, in winter on skis. They left the village of Vizhai on the 27th of January, 1959. The plan was clean: climb to the high country, cross the watershed, return in roughly 2 weeks. Datlov told a sports club back in the city he would send a telegram on the 12th of February. The telegram never came. When the expected date passed, families wrote letters. Then they made phone calls. By the 20th of February, the Institute organized a search. Volunteers, then military, then helicopters. On the 26th of February, searchers found the tent. It was on the eastern slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kolatsiak, Dead Mountain. The tent was half buried in snow. The fabric had been cut open from the inside. Inside, no one. Boots stacked neatly, the stove packed. A meal had been started. Outside, footprints led down slope, away from shelter, toward a tree line a kilometer below. Some of the prints were of bare feet, some of socks, some of a single boot. The wind had filled in most of them, but enough remained to count. 9 sets of feet, walking, not running, in line, into the night. The first bodies were found near the tree line. 2 men, in their underwear, beneath a large cedar. There were burns on their hands. Branches above them, several meters up, had been broken, as if someone had climbed in the dark to look back the way they had come. 3 more were found between the cedar and the tent. Among them, Datlov himself, lying as if he had been trying to crawl back uphill. The remaining 4 were not recovered until May. The snow had to melt. They lay in a ravine, a few hundred meters further down, under more than 3 meters of compacted ice. It was these 4 that turned a tragedy into something the Soviet investigators could not name. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, had been one of the strongest hikers in the group. When her body was recovered, her tongue and most of her eyes were gone. The official report attributed this to decomposition in flowing water. Some of the searchers, looking at her, did not accept that. Nikolai Thibos-Brignol's had a fractured skull. The fracture was severe. There was no corresponding wound to the scalp. Semyon Zolotaryev, the oldest of the group, a 38-year-old veteran of the war, had a chest crushed inward with a Force 1 investigator compared to a high-speed automobile collision. Again, almost no external bruising. The injuries were internal, as if something heavy had pressed against them, briefly, with terrible exactness, and then let go.
Their clothing told its own story. Some of them were wearing pieces of clothing that had been cut from the bodies of others. The living had taken from the dead, in the cold, and tried to keep going. A jacket on one of the women in the ravine had belonged to one of the men by the cedar. A pair of trousers had been cut along a seam, the cleaner edge of the cloth still visible on the body it had been removed from. Then there were the readings. Some of the recovered clothing tested positive for low-level radioactive contamination, not at levels that suggested a weapon, but at levels that did not belong on the wool of 9 winter hikers in a remote Soviet forest. The official inquest, opened that spring, lasted 3 months. Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator, interviewed everyone he could reach: searchers, family members, the local Mansi who had been suspected at first and then quietly cleared. He examined the tent, the cuts, the footprints, the wounds. He logged statements about strange lights in the sky seen by other expeditions in the region around the same dates, and he did not pretend they did not exist. He simply could not place them, and on the 28th of May he closed the file. The cause of death, his report stated, was a compelling natural force, the precise nature of which the investigation could not determine. The case was sealed. Some of its files were classified. The families of the dead were told only that their children had perished in the mountains. The diaries of the hikers, photographs from their cameras, the radiological readings, most of it would not be released for another 30 years. In the city of Sverdlovsk, the Institute held a memorial. The graves were dug close together, by request of the families, so that the 9 would not be alone. For 3 decades, Dyatlov Pass was a silence the state preferred. Then, in the early 1990s, the archives opened, and the names came back. Yuri Kontsevich, who as a boy had watched the funerals in Sverdlovsk, founded a foundation in their memory and began to lobby for re-examination. Researchers came, journalists came. Some of the original searchers, by then old men, sat down and went over what they had seen. The theories accumulated, careful at first, then less careful. A military weapons test gone wrong, a dispute with the local Monsi, infrasound from the wind across the slope, which can produce panic in the human ear, an avalanche, partial and missed by the searchers, a katabatic wind, dense cold air falling off the ridge with the weight of a wall, even in some quarters, things that do not have names in any official report. In 2019, the Russian Federation reopened the case. The investigators were narrower than the public had hoped. They considered 3 natural scenarios: avalanche, hurricane-force wind, and snow slab. In 2020, they announced their conclusion. A small slab avalanche, they said, had compromised the tent. The hikers had cut their way out, fled to the trees in the dark, and died of cold and impact injuries before they could return.
In 2021, 2 engineers in Switzerland, Johann Gaume and Alexander Puzren, published a paper in the journal Nature Communications, modeling how a delayed slab release on a slope of just under 30 degrees could account for the unusual injuries. They borrowed crash test data from automotive research to estimate how a slow-moving block of compacted snow, the size of a small car, could fracture a chest or a skull while leaving little visible mark on the skin. The math was elegant. The peer-reviewed verdict, in the language of physics, was plausible. It was not, for some, an answer. Survivors of the original searchers pointed out things the slab model could not place. The tent was on a windswept slope where serious avalanches had never been recorded. Some of the wounds did not pattern with falling snow. The footprint showed an organized, not a panicked descent. The radiological readings, the missing tissue, the time of night, the diary entries that grew suddenly cryptic in the final pages. The official record now reads, compelling natural force, specifics unidentified, a sentence almost identical to the one Lev Ivanov closed the file with in 1959. 67 years. That is the distance now between us and the night on Coldest Yakel. The witnesses are mostly gone. Yuri Yudin, who had turned back from the expedition days earlier because of illness and so survived to bury his friends, lived into old age and was buried by his own request beside them. He died still believing that what happened on the slope was not what the official report said. The bodies were autopsied, the cameras were developed, the diaries were copied. The trees the men climbed are still standing, or fallen by now into the same soil. The slope itself is unchanged in any way a satellite can measure, and we still cannot say, with the kind of certainty a record requires, what made 9 experienced young people cut their way out of a sound tent, in the dark, in 25 below, and walk in line down a mountain. Some questions resolve themselves through patience. Most do. A war ends, a document is declassified. A witness, finally old enough to lose nothing by speaking, speaks. The record fills in. Some questions don't. What we have instead is a row of graves in a Yekaterinburg cemetery. 2 diaries, one of them broken off mid-sentence. A few photographs. The last frame from one of the cameras shows nothing identifiable, only a smear of light against darkness, and we do not know if it was taken on purpose. We have an autopsy report whose conclusions a generation of forensic readers have argued over, line by line. We have the testimony of an old searcher who decades later would still not walk that slope alone. We have a slope, and a tree line, and a ravine, and a wind that has not stopped blowing since. We have 9 names. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogoeva, Rustem Slobodin, Yuri Krivonishenko, Yuri Doroshenko, Nikolai Thibault Brignoles, Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Semyon Zolotaryev. Students, mostly. 1 veteran. Friends. People who had laced their boots that morning expecting to lace them again the next. A natural force, the file says, the exact nature of which the investigation could not determine. Sometimes that is what an honest archive sounds like. I keep a folder for the cases that resist closure. Dyatlov is in it. Not because I think there is some final answer hidden in a Soviet vault waiting to be found. There may not be. I keep it because the act of leaving a file open is itself a kind of respect. The mountain has its name back, Dead Mountain. The Monsi gave it that name long before 9 students walked up its eastern slope, and they were not, it turns out, wrong about it. If the unfinished histories trouble you the way they trouble me, there is another file, already on the desk, waiting.